Open your Bibles to Matthew 16, verse 13. This is where I'm going to start, and this is where I'm going to end tonight, God willing. Now, at first, it ain't going to make much sense to you. But I want to read the verse first so you understand eventually why, when we get there, what it means. When Jesus came into the coast, I'm in verse 13 in Matthew chapter 16. When Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" What was the purpose of asking that question? Why did he ask that question? Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And of course, they gave their answers. Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some say Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. But then he asked again in verse 15. He said unto them, "But who say ye that I am?" And then Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." It's an amazing answer, especially what we know about Peter up to this point. But why at Caesarea Philippi did he ask this question? He could ask this question anywhere he wanted. What possibly was the reason why they're at Caesarea Philippi? You ever ask yourself that question? Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? Now, keep your Bibles open to that verse. I'll come back to it in about 45 minutes. We're continuing tonight, or I'm continuing tonight, and you're joining with me, where I left off. And if you didn't listen to any other previous message there's about probably around half a dozen or so messages on the war of Gog and Magog. And it's nothing like you have ever probably heard before, because all of you have the Christian science fiction background thinking it's Russia, this and that. So you're going to be lost if you didn't take advantage of the Last Day series video archives and catching up to the point where we are at now. If you're new, I suggest you go to Last Day series archives and look for, at the end, the War and Magog messages and catch up, because I'll be on this subject now for at least another 2 or 3 messages. Now, it's been about, a month and a half at least since I've been on this subject matter. And I left us in Enoch chapter 1, the book of Enoch. I'm reading from the Richard Lawrence. There's other translations. All these translations have certain problems with them, but this is what I'm using tonight. Chapter 1, the book of Enoch. Lawrence translation. I brought up the subject about mountains. I left us off in the mountains in this Gog Magog war teaching in the Last Day series. If you remember, if you don't, if you weren't around, this won't mean much to you. But in verse 4, who will hereafter tread upon Mount Sinai? In the book of Enoch, Mount Sinai is the first mountain. that appears in his writings. Now, that's where I left us when I stopped on the teaching on this series. But Mount Sinai is not the subject matter in this, well, it will be, but not right now, in this particular section of the Gog Magog teaching. I just wanted to point it out because I kind of dangled it, that Mount Sinai was one of the mountains in the book of Enoch, is the first mountain listed, but it's not the only mountain. There's other mountains. And you don't have to go too many chapters into the book of Enoch to come across another mountain. But before we get to that, I'm going to do some reading. Now, Jerome was a 4th century translator of the Latin Vulgate Bible. And he has something very interesting. I decided to read you Enoch. I changed my mind. In my translation, Lawrence's translation, that I have here in front of me, is chapter 7. You have a book of Enoch with you? You can open it up. It reads in verse 1, "It happened after the sons of man had multiplied in those days that daughters were born to them elegant and beautiful. And when the angels, the sons of heaven, beheld them, they became enamored of them, saying to each other, 'Come, let us select for ourselves wives from the progeny of men, and let us begat children.' Then their leader Samyaza said to them, 'I fear that you may perhaps be indisposed to the performance of this enterprise, and that I alone shall suffer for so grievous a crime.' But they answered him and said, 'We all swear and bind ourselves by mutual excreations that we will not change our intention but execute our projected undertaking.' Then they swore all together, and all bound themselves. Their whole number was 200, who descended upon Ardis, Ardis, which is the top of Mount Armin, or Mount Hermon as we know it today, which Mount Hermon has a lot of different definitions to its name, depending who you want to believe. But the furthest back name definition that identifies Mount Hermon or Armin or Ardis is cursed. Why is it cursed? Well, I just read you what leads up to it, or forbidden place. Verse 8, "That mountain therefore was called Armin, because they had sworn upon it." Some translations will read, "They call that Mount Armin, because they had sworn upon it and bound themselves by mutual excretions." And then it gives the names of the leaders of this 200, and they took wives, and they taught the teachings of sorcery and all kinds of things. And the woman conceived, bringing forth giants. You know the story. And then the giants decided to turn on men when they couldn't even feed themselves. And they began to injure birds, beasts, reptiles, and fishes, to eat their flesh one after another, and to drink their blood. Now, that's what you find the second reference of a mountain in the book of Enoch. Even though it starts with Mount Sinai, by the time you get to chapter 7, in Lawrence's translation, he deals with Enoch, that is, what happened on today's Mount Hermon, which was Armin, on the tips of Ardis, on Mount Hermon. You got that? Now, Jerome, like I said, interpret Hermon as an anathema. Mount Hermon was the port of entry port of entry for a group of wicked angels, which I just read to you in the book of Enoch, who corrupted the human race in the days of Noah. Now Moses wrote, the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. You find that if you want to. In fact, you probably should get some note paper and a pen and write down all the verses that I'll read to you tonight, because I don't have time to go to each of these verses and review them with you. You could do that on your own. And of course, what I just read, what Moses wrote, comes from Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Now, certain rabbis have written about this subject matter also, and the traditions were developed that these Nephilim, which also were called Uzzah and Aziel. They were just two of the players, whom God deprived of their supernatural abilities. And of course, they said, how it may be asked, can they exist in this world? Because they were a class of spirits referred to in the words, and this is kind of unique here. And these rabbis concluded that these class of angels were like birds which fly on the earth. Were like birds which fly on the earth. And these seem to appear like men in the form of human beings, or appear to men in the form of human beings. Now, that's speculation. I'm the first one to tell you that's speculation. We don't know for sure what they exactly look like. We know that it had the ability to be producing children, became giants with the daughters of men. And of course, when these rabbis, and this goes back centuries, thousands of years, in fact, if they ask how can they transform themselves, these bird-like angels, the answer they gave was that they transformed themselves in all kinds of shapes, because when they came down from heaven, they came as concrete as air and take human shape. And these are Uzzah and Aziel, who rebelled in heaven and were cast down by God and became corporal on the earth and remained on it, not being able to divest themselves of their earthly form any longer. Subsequently, they went astray after women, and up to this day they exist and teach men the arts of magic. They begat children whom they call Anakim, or the giants, while the Nephilim themselves were called sons of God. So they describe this as a class of spirits described as bird-like. And some concluded maybe this was the origin of the story that angels had bird-like wings. To this day, white doves are symbolic of good, while black crows are typical of evil. It should also be noted that birds seem to have a reptilian connection. The phoenix was depicted as an eagle in the west, but in the east it was a winged dragon. From ancient lore, Satan was thought to be somewhat of a gargoyle with bat-like wings. Like I said, this is all speculation. Not that there were giants, not that the Nephilim came down, the watchers, angels, with a group of leaders in that angel group, of that 200 original angels. All that, I'm convinced, using the scriptures and other sources, that was real. That happened. What they look like, I have not been able to get enough solid evidence to bring it to you to say this is what they were like. All I can read you is stories that give speculations of possibly what happens, including some very ancient rabbis that came up with their own stories. Is there any factual truth to it? I don't know. Maybe there is, and maybe there's not. And that's not even the whole point of this tonight. But out of that original group of angels, the speculation, the stories, and this is just some of it, there's much more, came and was spread, and in some cases was accepted as the truth. Now, the apocryphal book of Enoch enlarges upon the story of Nephilim. But first, let me give you a little background on this mysterious book. Scholars have traced its origin back past the 1st century. In the early literature of the church, there's a whole chain of evidence to this effect. Nearly all the church leaders knew of the apocryphal book of Enoch. Among the apostolic leaders, the Epistle of Barnabas refers to such work. From that time on to about the 7th century, Christian literature produces ample proof of the constant use and high standing of this book. The early theologians such as Justin Martyr, Clemens of Alexandria, Origen, Tertullian, Jerome, Augustine, and many others, by the way, refer to the book of Enoch and use it, following the example of Jude, whose citation is taken from Enoch 1:9. Now the following is quoted from the book of Enoch. And it came to pass, after the children of men had increased in those days, beautiful and comely daughters were born to them. This is a different translation than I just read to you. And the angels, the sons of heavens, saw and lusted after them, and said one to another, Behold, we will choose for ourselves wives from among the children of men, and will begat for ourselves children. And they ascended on Ardes, which I already read to you, which is the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon, because they had sworn on it and bound themselves mutually by a curse. And of course, this translation is not chapter 7, it's chapter 6. Of all places on this planet where angels could have descended, it was on the northern border of the Promised Land. Perhaps knowing something about God's future plans to give territory to Abraham's descendants, these angels plotted their strategy to introduce the seed of the serpent into the human race. Also, Mount Hermon laid in the territory where Ham and his family migrated after the judgment at the Tower of Babel. According to Genesis 10:6, Ham had 4 sons. And the sons, of course, was Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Now, Canaan, which we already covered some of this before in the past, most of it. Canaan settled in the area of Mount Hermon and southward into the territory that was to become Abraham's promised land. This is why the promised land was called Canaan in the days of Moses and Joshua. Now, Mizraim continued to move southward into Egypt, which we already covered also in the past. Now, back to the book of Enoch. So these fallen angels descended on this mountain from the heavens. To review quickly. And they made a pact there amongst themselves. That's why the place is called Cursed. And they made the pact. Of course, we're told that the daughters of men lured them here. I think it took more than that. I think there were a rebellion in the heavens. I think there were several rebellions in the heavens. First, it started with Satan, God knows when. And through a period of time, a continuous rebellion was still taking place. And this is just one of the events of the rebellion that we see here in the book of Enoch. Back to the book of Enoch. And they took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go into them and mix with them, and taught them charms, and made them acquainted with cutting of roots and of woods. And they become pregnant, and brought forth great giants, whose stature was 3,000 ells. These devoured all the acquisitions of mankind, till men were unable to sustain themselves. And the giants turned themselves against mankind in order to devour them. Different translation than the one I just read to you when I started the program tonight, the teaching part of it. It seems that these fallen angels, the Nephilim, contaminated almost all life on earth. We don't know how many people were contaminated, but we are told that at least Noah's family remained genetically pure. For that reason, God destroyed the world with a flood. Had it not been for Noah and his 3 sons, those fallen angels might have brought an end to life, to all life on the planet. Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth helped save the animals and repopulated the earth. Now, both Peter and Jude added further insight about these fallen angels. What does that have to do with Gog and Magog? We'll get there eventually. Both Peter and Jude added further insight about these fallen angels. Peter said, God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them to the chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment, to spare not the old world, but saved Noah, the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. For those who have taken notes, that's in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 and verse 5. Now in Jude chapter 6, Jude puts it this way: the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Now, both passages tell us of severe punishment upon the Nephilim. Yet Moses said that the sons of God reappeared after the flood. That's how most translate it in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. How can this be? Well, the book of Enoch only mentioned 200 angels. Well, let's go to Genesis chapter 6, verse 4 real quick, because I want to make sure you know exactly what is being mentioned here. Genesis 6, chapter 4 reads, there were giants in those days, and also after that. And also after that. There were giants in those days, and also after that, meaning a yet time in the future, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men. You got it? How can this be? Well, the book of Enoch only mentioned 200 angels, and Satan was not among them. Bear in mind, Satan's forces were much larger than a mere 200. Perhaps the original group of Nephilim were scouts for a much larger force of demonic angels, who, under the leadership of Satan, came to earth after the flood. More speculation there. Don't know for sure. It seems to me that the Tower of Babel, which, by the way, means gate to God, and may have been built in an effort to contact these dark forces and forge a defense against the threat of another judgment. Speculation, we'll never know for sure, but interesting read anyway. As noted above, Genesis 6:4 adds, and after that, meaning that more Nephilim returned to this area after the flood and established what Joshua called the land of giants. Moses and Joshua conquered those giants, of whom Og was king. Moses wrote that Og's bed was almost 15 feet long. For those of you who want to verify that, you go to Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 11 through verse 13. Og reigned in Mount Hermon. What a coincidence. Joshua wrote, and the coast of Og, king of Bashan, which of the remnant of the giants that dwelt at Ashtaroth, familiar name, and atEndre, and reigned in Mount Hermon and in Salcah, and all of Bashan, unto the borders of the Geshurites and the Machatites, and half of Gilead, the border of Sihon, king of Heshbon. In Joshua 12, write this down, verse 4 through 6. Then did Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the children of Israel smite. Smite who? These giants. Now the tribe of Dan moved to this area during the days of the judges and adopted the Canaanite worship of those angels, those giants. It was an ancient idolatry that opposed the worship of Jehovah. In fact, Baal and Ashtaroth were Canaanite deities whose origin was Mount Hermon. Interesting. Everybody just takes it back as far as Babylon, for instance. When Cush, the father of chaos, and his sons, Nimrod and Samaris and Tammuz and all those characters, they just brought with them what was already established, that flowed almost like we call the information superhighway with the internet. This is an information highway of false doctrines, idol worship, and every evil, wicked thing. In the center of it was Mount Hermon, because that's where these angels, to use the word that I read to you earlier, brought the information through this portal called Mount Hermon. Sounds almost like science fiction. The tribe of Dan moved in this area during the days of judges and adopted Canaanite worship of these angels. It was an ancient idolatry that opposed the worship of Jehovah. In fact, Baal and Ashtaroth were Canaanite deities whose origin was Mount Hermon. The book of Judges even called Mount Hermon Baal Hermon, Baalhermon. In Judges, write this down, chapter 3, verse 3. Furthermore, the fallen angels living on and around Mount Hermon adopted a biblical name for the mountain. They had the audacity to plagiarize a name that God had given to Mount Moriah, Mount Zion, Moses wrote. Zion there spelled S-I-O-N, which is different than how it's spelled further south. Furthermore, well, let's just read the scriptures, what I just read to you. In Deuteronomy 4, 47th and 48th verse, it reads, and they possessed that's Sihon's land, and the land of Og, king of Bashan, 2 kings of the Amorites, which on this side Jordan toward the sun rising, from Aor, which is by the bank of the river Arnon, even unto Mount Zion, which is Hermon. S-I-O-N. Very important. Don't confuse the two. Which is Hermon. You find that in Deuteronomy 47 and 48. Now, let me try to show you real quick on a map the areas that this is referring to. And we're looking at about 25 to 30 miles at the most. Go to the camera here. Okay. Okay, there we go. Mount Hermon. Present day, this is where the Golan Heights is, in this location. Mount Hermon's further north, right there. Now the Ashtaroth and Endre is here and here, about 25 and 30 miles south of the base of Mount Hermon. That's the areas where, after the flood, Og of Bashan dwelled. And these land of the giants consisted of this area, and Mount Hermon was their place of idol worship, amongst other things. You got it? Now back to me. Zion, S-I-O-N, means lofty, where Zion, Z-I-O-N, means stronghold. It is evident that Satan was pushing for a counterfeit of God's plan for man's redemption. The devil is determined to replace the seed of the woman with the seed of the serpent. In the excavations of Baalbek, renamed Heliopolis by the Greeks, temples were uncovered by honoring Baal and Bacchus. The same is true of the site at Sidon, S-I-D-O-N, Mount Hermon area. The temple there is named the Temple of Baal of Sidon. But by far of greater importance was the Temple of Baal found on actually Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon, the chief of mountains of Palestine, is 5 miles wide and 20 miles long. It has 3 peaks, the tallest of which is approximately 9,166 feet above the Mediterranean Sea. For centuries before Abraham's time, the mountain had been venerated in connection with Baal. Baal worship was a leading religion of Canaan. On most of the high peaks of the country were shrines known as high places. The higher the shrine, the holier. So you could put 2 and 2 together. Mount Hermon is the tallest mountains. The tallest mountain in that area. Ardis being the tallest peak. And the higher you go, the holier the shrine dedicated to this evil. Here groves were planted and shrines erected for worship. Since Mount Hermon towered above all other mountains in the region, it was the chief high place. The shrine of shrines. Canaanites looked to Mount Hermon much as the Muslims face Mecca when they pray. Now, during the summer of 1934, a small expedition in which studied the ancient Baal shrines surrounding Mount Hermon took place, and they located many ruins. In each case, the shrine was so oriented that when the priests and the devoted ones were at the altar, they faced the chief Baal sanctuary, or Qibla, located on the highest of the 3 peaks of Hermon. Taking a quote from one of their writings from this expedition, it says, when we then ascended the mountain and found the ruined temple of Baal, constructed by Herodian masonry, which dated it to just previous to and during the early Christian era. In a low place near the northwest corner of the temple, we excavated and found loads of ash and burnt bone, which had been dumped there as a refuse from sacrifices. During Jesus' time. Well, I thought the Jews never worshipped after coming back from Babylon 400 plus years earlier, these Canaanite idols any longer. That's everybody's assumption. But these shrines and temples carved into the side of these mountains, these altars, huge altars, were made for the worship of Baal in a form of the moon god religion. I've told you Satan never has had a plan B. It's always been plan A. Before the flood and after the flood. Now, let me show you something, because I'm running out of time. I'm not going to get as far as I wanted to tonight, but this starts it. Starts where I want to go, and I'll pick it up next time. But before I finish tonight, I want to get back to that Matthew verse. Let me see if I can find it real quick here. Hang on. Here it is. I'm going to the camera again. Camera 2. Back to Matthew, where I started tonight. Here's Mount Hermon. This is where Jesus was, at the base of this mountain. Caesarea Philippi. Let me see if I get that better shot of that. Mount Hermon, Philippi. You can almost see the topography of the mountains in this picture. Caesarea Philippi, Mount Hermon. You got that? Picture that in your mind. Keep it there. Because I'm going to run out of time. I want to get to Matthew 16. Come back to me. When Jesus came into the coast, I'm in Matthew 16 again. Now with all that information, I'm just giving you a synopsis, really, of information that's available. But this is all you really need to know at this point concerning Mount Hermon. Wicked angels use it as a portal area, let's just call it that, to travel down from the heavens, to bring their wicked ways brought on by the rebellion against God. And then coming down to this mountain, moving on from this mountain, polluted mankind, producing giants from the daughters of men, teaching them things they had no business with God, because God didn't want them to know at that time, and completely setting the population of this earth on a destructive course, except for one family. Flood came, destroyed everyone except that one family. But in Genesis 6:4 it says there was still a transporting, let's just take it that far, of these angels up and down this mountain. Now 6:4 doesn't say that, just 6:4 said it, just said it after that. After that, meaning that angels still were corrupting the daughters of men. Obviously, they were more limited. Which angels, we don't know. That information is not given to us, neither in the Bible or outside sources. But once again, giants. In some cases, not as large as the previous giants, but they're still giants compared to mankind. And they settled southeast, approximately 20 to 25 miles up from the base of Mount Hermon in Israel. Not known as Israel back then, but in the land of Canaan. Moses and Joshua came along. They destroyed the giants. Now, that didn't stop the Baal worship, the moon god worship, and every other false doctrine religion that was developed. Mostly after Babylon captivity for the Jews in Judah, done by foreigners, but still participants of the Jewish population, specifically the ones further north in the land of Canaan, even up to Jesus' day. There's historical evidence of that, folks. If I have time, which I don't know if I will, I might present that to you. Even during Jesus' day, I don't think it's by accident. I don't think it's a coincidence that we see here in Matthew 16, verse 13. When Jesus came to the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" Right there at the slopes of Mount Hermon, he's asking this question in verse 13. And Baal worship was in full swing. Shrines, altars, all there at that base and further up. And Jesus is asking the question, who do men say that I am? I, the Son of Man, am. Who do they say? Really think about it. What a place to ask that question. Right there, standing in the territory of his greatest enemy, Satan, and all the evil angels, in all their idolatrous ways, the Nephilim, that polluted and kept polluting, especially in that area, the sons of man. Is that a coincidence that Jesus asked that question there? Not at all. Not at all. I think that's where I'm going to leave you tonight. Because to go any further, I couldn't finish it in time. Just ponder on that till next time. Nothing good comes from this mountain up to this point. And what still lies ahead is what we're going to take a look at as we pursue in this last day teachings the truth of the Gog and Magog war. But that's where I'll leave you tonight. If you found this interesting, I want to hear from you. I have a lot more to say about this. and let me know if you're going to keep on listening. Now, it's your turn to talk to me, so play a song. I want to hear from you. Hopefully you wrote down all the scriptures and you can review this when it comes available in the archives, hopefully sooner than later, and follow along with all the scriptures in front of you and see for yourself this mountain in history, both from the book of Enoch and through the scriptures, how it's played a role in history and still has a large role to play in the future. Now play a song. I want to hear from you.